Lou, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Freeze tonight for some reason. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Glad to see everybody this evening. We'll go ahead and dive right in. First thing I want to do tonight is kind of do a retrospection of last week's case study. And then we're going to talk about a previous case study, but let's kind of debrief on last week's case study. Somebody, anybody. Jennifer, I see you up there. Welcome, Drs. Griffin, Jordan, and Dr. Hallman. Thank you for being with us as always. Jennifer, what was your takeaway from our case study last week?
Well, I think for me, the most thing is that my group and I have really sort of melded together well and have progressed through each case study, like to just really understand, get a better understanding in the gist of how important it is to follow policy, procedure, and law. And, not think with your heart, even though it doesn't seem right, because maybe it doesn't feel right, we have to do what's right. And I think that these case studies have really brought that really to the forefront for me, because I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve sometimes. And I know that that is something that as an administrator, yes, you have feelings, but at the end of the day, the law, like you say, the law is the law, and we have to follow policy. And I think with all of these case studies, that really has been just driving that point home. And I think it's been really, really helpful.
That's exactly right. That's a wonderful answer, Jennifer. The whole notion here is the theme that runs through all of our 4 case studies this semester is you got to follow the law, policy. Somewhere, as I told you in your interviews for an AP job, they're going to ask you if something's unpopular, would you do it anyway? Yes, the answer is yes. I will always follow law and policy. That's the theme. But the other theme, as was picked out by one of our classmates, also a underlying theme on all these is that we got to be champions for students. We have to protect children in each of these. The teacher was trying to wear Billy out in the first one. The superintendent's plan, while it was going to give some extra resources to some kids, was going to pull resources from other kids who may be harmed. This one, Jimmy and Willie. I mean, so that we have 2 themes running here. And so we have to understand the theme that's kind of in your face and out there is we must follow law and policy all the time and know what that law and policy is. The second piece of this is we have to make sure that we understand that we have to be a champion for students all the time, that we have to make sure we protect kids. That's our role. That's what we're hired to do. And between those 2 things, that's kind of the theme that we have. So I hope everyone is beginning to see. Okay. So I hope that you can see that now. Why that's important is coming up will be our last case study after our last break for the semester. And the way the semester just happened to work out, it's we've got this week and next week and then a break, and then we'll I believe that's right. So let's look at our weekly schedule. So we're in week 13, Zoom session 12 tonight. Let me get over here to this one. Week 13, 12, we'll have another week next week where we'll talk about budgeting. And then we'll have our Easter break, and then we'll come back. The way it works, we'll have our case study when we come back. So I want to kind of prompt you on your last case study tonight. So you'll need to be working on it starting next week. Our case study, our last case study, is going to put everything that we've covered this semester all together. Everything from discipline and behavior to complaining parents to following the law or protecting kids. It's all going to be there. And so again, we've got to follow the law, but we also got to protect kids as well. And so we're going to have FERPA's going to come up with parents complaining about other people's kids and It's all going to be rolled into one. Now, it's not said in the United States, but that's immaterial. It's the location is immaterial. So don't let that throw you. It's not a trick. It is as straightforward as it appears to be. But it's going to call on you to everything that you've learned this semester from every week. There's going to be a component of that in this case study coming up in 2 weeks. So my charge to you is make sure that you get started early on this one, because it's quite comprehensive. I'm warning you now. That's why I'm giving you 3 weeks notice normal than the 2. This one's going to take a little extra. It is very, very involved. It's going to be in depth. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, but it's nothing that we haven't already covered. By the time we get there, you'll know all of them. It's just, this one's going to take some extra effort because of the complexity of the case itself. But remember those 2 underlying themes, following the law and making sure we protect kids. If you do that, you'll be fine. But it is quite extensive. The last case study is. It has a lot of moving parts to it. So that's just a heads up. In terms of your evidence work, a lot of you should be, hopefully finishing up your skip here pretty quickly. And some of you are already moved to the CAP. We have one who's already finished the CAP. And to that end, let me share my screen again. I want to make sure that you see these things in our shell. In our shell, over here on the side, you will see CAP materials. This is where you'll find all your materials that you need. Your assignment Dropbox. You don't have to peer review any of your CAP tasks. They come straight to me. And then your Turnitin check is here. So if you get to the CAP this semester, there is no peer review. You can submit them straight to me and we move on. But there are your boxes right there in our shell. All right, so tonight, in terms of our content, let's look ahead at our weekly schedule. So your 3 discussion boards for this week, that obviously, again, we work ahead. The things that we'll be talking about. So next week, I'll be talking about fundraising. So when you're out interviewing an administrator about fundraising, don't talk to the school secretary. This is not about accounting. This is about what are the policies? What do we have to do? And I'll cover all those for a particular school district next week. And then list the 5 most important steps in the budgeting process. Again, you need to talk to the principal, or you need to make sure that they understand it's the process. What gets you where you develop your budget, and the other is locate a copy of your budget. Does it contain federal, state, and local funds? And so next week, y'all are going to kind of get a break, in that Drs. Holloman and Dr. Griffin Jordan will lead next week, because they're going to tell you about how the process for fundraising and budgeting works at their school. Now, remembering, as I've told you before, it works differently in every district. It works differently at every school, but they're going to give you the overview of, fundraising in Franklin County versus fundraising in Durham. I'm going to talk to you briefly about fundraising in Charlotte. Different places have different rules. And then they're going to talk to you most specifically about, in the spring of the year, after Christmas, when we get started the second semester, when it gets to be what's known as budget season in the school business, how do they start that? What is their list of important things in the budgeting process? Where do they start? What do they do? They're going to talk to you about that extensively next week. Again, you need to hear how that works, because again, it's one of those things. It varies from district to district, to school, but they will give you the parameters of what they think is the sound way to go about doing that. So that will be next week, and I'm sure they'll have wonderful lessons prepared for you. I've given them the heads up that as we got toward the end, that they would be doing some mini lessons. So, you'll probably have something like 20 minutes or 30 minutes apiece. So whatever you'd like to do in those topics would be wonderful for our students. And I'll just do a quick and dirty on fundraising and CMS. I've already got my stuff pulled together. So, but we're going to talk about budgets next week. All right, tonight our topic is facilities and and funding. And so, as you know, we've already done our funding case study with Leandro. So let's look at some state law in North Carolina. There's companion laws in South Carolina. But let's start with, let's look at that in terms of how money comes to districts. Let me share my screen. All right, so as I told you earlier, and we talked about earlier in the semester, in 1966, most states got out of the capital funding business. So what that means is your money for capital, which is buildings and grounds, and even technology is considered capital. And even back in my day, technology meant the copy machine or the mimeograph. All of that is capital. That comes from your local budget. Now, a rule of thumb is about 85% of your funding that comes to you in a public school comes from the state, and about 15% comes from the local. Now, that can vary. Again, it goes back to Leandro. Let me say that again. It goes back to the Leandro case. You know, local districts can give bigger amounts, and that was the whole notion of the Leandro case was our local is poor. They can't give us much. We only get the state money. We want the state to give us more and give some others less, so that in the end we all end up with the same. Well, we know that's illegal. That's against the law. And so kind of a rule of thumb is the baseline is about 15%. That's in the poorer districts, and it can go up as much as 30% in the wealthier districts in terms of the percentage of the budget that comes from the local. But again, that local money is for capital. Now, there's no rule that says that the local can't also buy extra teachers. When I first started teaching school, and you actually got a check, they handed you a check at the end of the month. They came around and handed them out. You got one of three colored checks. If you were a state paid teacher, you got a blue check. If you were a federally paid teacher, you got a green check. And if you were a local teacher, you got a yellow check. There were such a thing in those days, and there still is, teachers that are paid out of the local budget that comes from the county commissioners. There's not many of them, but there are some of those still left, locally funded positions. But the majority of that local budget comes somewhere between 15 and 30% comes from county commissioners in your county or city if you're in a city district, one of the 14 city districts. But that money comes to you from them. And so the school board has to submit a budget each year. School boards are unempowered. Please remember that. They can't levy their own taxes. They have to go hat in hand to the county commissioners and ask for money. And they fund their budget. That 85%, is kind of the baseline, and some, again, some is 70% because some counties give more and some give less. But the majority of that money is used for capital. A little bit of it is used for personnel. And so that's kind of how funding works in terms of where money comes from. Now, as you know, federal programs are funded directly from the feds, like Title I or CTE or EC. Those come with the student population. There's no discretion in that. The money just comes. And so that can be a part of, you can show it on your budget sheet, but generally there is no manipulation. The only variation in those federal funds is that Title I money on how you spend it locally. There is a little loose Title I money, but that's only for Title I schools. Schools that have Title I programs, they don't have near the flexibility as schools. The entire school is a Title I school. And so you need to remember that federal money is pretty much earmarked. There's not a lot of discretion other than, as I said, a little bit of Title I money for those parent events where you can buy some refreshments with those. But even that's been limited now. So federal money is pretty much earmarked. State money mostly pays for salaries, and local money pays for the actual facility. And that's kind of the way it works. So if your operating budget, somewhere between 15 and 30, is local money. The other 70 to 85% is state. And then outside of that is your federal money. It's not really in your budget because it only pays for specific programs. I'm going to pause and catch my breath and have each of our principal experts to talk about that funding ratio in their at their school or in their district. We'll start with Dr. Griffin Jordan. Dr. Griffin Jordan, if you could give us some idea of the funding in your district in Durham.
Well, Durham does not, for one, as far as like Title I funding, Durham does not give high schools the Title I funding. It's sorted to the lower grade levels in hopes that all that funding would help prepare them so that when they get to us, they wouldn't need it. So they've allotted most of their money, well, all of their federal monies outside of high school. The ratios that you gave were pretty accurate. We have, the majority, of course, is state. As I work with my bookkeeper, we have, it's a 2-page sheet and it's like line items. And, she's like, okay, when I first came aboard, and again, I think I've said this before, you've got to have a good bookkeeper, a good treasurer, especially because a lot of times assistant principals don't get fully involved in budgeting. You're going to step into the principal role. If you can get it before then, that's perfect. But she sat me down and we went through and she's like, all these up here, this is just federal funds. You cannot do anything with this. This is just for this. This is just for this. She did the same with state. When she got down to local, that's where we talked about different things. Okay, so now when you want to feed the faculty or if you want to throw a pizza party for the students because they did well, these can be moved around. If you have this budget item and you want to move money here, you just let me know and we can kind of work it out. So the more local you get, the more flexibility you have to move and shift. But I have a good bookkeeper. She's like, you can't touch this. You can't touch that. It's just for these. So that's something that I've looked at, and we're toward the end of our budgeting cycle for this year. We're looking forward to next year. There are certain monies that if we don't spend real soon, we lose it completely. A lot of our local money will go over, like our checking account money. Well, of course it will stay in the checking account. So she's like, we need to spend all of our state money first, spend all of that first, then we'll work with our local money because we'll keep that if we don't spend all of that this year.
Excellent. Now you heard her say very clearly, those federal line items, you can't touch those. They may be shown on your balance sheet and on your budget, but you can't be touching or moving that money or anything. And the only discretion is if you are a Title I school, there's a little bit of that parent money that they call it that you might have some control over. But most districts don't even allow that money at the high school level. Some of them, don't even allow it at the middle school level. It's only at the elementary. And just like in the county where Gardner Webb is in Cleveland County, they have a Title I director, and she makes all decisions, all ALL. There is no discretion whatsoever at the building level for any Title I money because they have a Title I director, and that's what she does, and she directs all the money. So the bottom line here is federal money, you'll reflect it on your balance sheet, but you won't be able to have any movement of that or say so in how it's spent. It all comes as encumbered to you. State money, not much wiggle room on it because most of it is salaries. You'll have some wiggle room on maybe trading positions and what you need and things like that, but not so much now that the state doesn't send staff development money and they send just a few pennies for office supplies. There's not a lot of discretion with, you can kind of change positions, but you really can't change the money. The state determines how much they're going to pay people. You can't say, well, I think he deserves more than her, or vice versa. You can't do that. Local money is where you have some discretion and some wiggle room and some movement. But again, that's by far the least amount of money. That's generally the baseline is about 15%, but it's also a lot of that's encumbered in your capital in terms of ongoing operating costs. But that's where you got to really have a good bookkeeper, as Dr. Griffin Jordan said, and track how you're spending. That's the accounting piece. That's not so much the budgeting piece as the accounting piece. You've got to account for that money and make sure you're spending appropriately. Dr. Holloman?
So I was trying to pull up information to share with you kind of the planning dates. As of the end of March, all of our funds, state and local, have to be encumbered. So we're already done. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. It's difficult to spend money on your students this year in April, May, and June. So you got to start planning that earlier, try to have all those things done. And at the end of the year, if you can get some grants, if some other funding can be found, then you may have a little bit left over that you can spend on additional calculators for a classroom. You know, it depends on what line item it's in. We don't have Title I funds at the high school level. I think we talked about this the last time we talked about federal funding too. You know, middle schools sometimes get those. Some districts push all of it down to the elementary schools, depending, hitting it in the area of greatest need. So we become very creative, I think, at times in trying to find outside funding sources. You know, we'll talk about this with fundraising, but you know, you've got to be very careful where your fundraising is so that it's not supplanting funds that are coming to you from federal or even state or even sometimes local funding buckets. Don't let your county commissioners hear that you're raising money for, you know, I'm trying to think of something, you know, for, let's say, classroom computer supplies. If your district is asking your county commissioners for money for classroom computer supplies, they may ask the question, if we're giving you all this money, why are your principals and schools still asking for it, privately? So some of that is directed by the district. I was looking at some of ours. We didn't actually get our money in our accounts. So our local dollars didn't show up until July 22nd of 2021. So if you think about it, you actually operate almost from April until July with nothing in the bank. You have some funds at the school level in your school fund account. You could call it principal fund, you can call it whatever you want to, but your general fund account that your school has. It could be from vending machines, it could be from PTO fundraisers, it could be from a lot of different things, but there's no carryover in a given year outside of a couple of accounts. High schools and middle schools both have athletics. You may have a lot of different clubs and activities that have done fundraising. Those accounts transfer over, but majority of your school budget is gone. So you have no money to spend on any big ticket items between that time of April 1st and usually July, sometimes August. And this past year, we didn't get state funds until I think it was about the end of October, beginning of November. So, and again, that depends on legislature and how often they, are going to release funds and when they're going to do that. And again, the biennial budget, as it becomes an issue, you've got to kind of watch that. So plan ahead. Don't, for me, I'm always going to have paper on hand to start the school year out of this year's money. Little things like that, school supplies, we've got those ready to go for next year. Planning, try to get a little bit ahead on that. And I looked at our funding percentage. So my school, we're at about 1,250 students. We make up 14.25% of the district's actual, and I'm gonna say share of our budget. That's really based on state and local funds. I get $150 per teacher for local instructional supplies. So with a teacher count, that is all of my certified staff. It does not include counselors. It does not include admin staff. It does include our media coordinator or digital literacy coordinator. I looked at our local copier assistants that we had this past year. It was right at $15,000 for almost 1,300 students for an entire year. And I'm going down looking at my budget. My athletic budget was $8,000 is what they gave us. To put it in perspective, I think we actually spend somewhere around 70 a year on athletics at our school. Everything else comes from ticket sales or fundraising, sponsorships, donors. The $8,000 might buy a couple of sets of uniforms depending upon the team. And that's about it. So it's not nearly what we actually have to have for operating costs. And no one ever is going to give it to you. I think Wake County, I think they may still get $1,000 in a case of paint. Used to be what they got, and I think that's what they still get. It's actually, there are times when you're going to look at your budget and you're going to wonder, well, how am I supposed to do the job I need to do with the money that I have available? Your teachers are your most valuable resource. The majority of money from all districts goes into human resource and human capital anyway. They're going to be the ones to help get the most out of those funds you've got. How do you maximize that? And one thing I'll tell you is, get creative in writing grants. We do quite a few at our school. This year, I think with the grants that we've gotten so far, probably around $10,000 to $15,000 in grant money. Most of those are classroom instructional grants. But if you think about it, if I can get a set of, color graphing calculators for 3 math classes with a grant, those classes, I don't need to spend, that money to purchase those calculators out of our school state instructional allotment. Things like that you can do. You have to start to kind of understand how those wheels work. Ask district office staff for something, figure out the best time of year and maybe sometimes the best time of the week, to call them and ask them for something. Maybe ask for 3 things, you get 1. Maybe it's the mid-range kind of thing you need to have. And you have your needs, wants, and wishes and work on those. I will be honest, and I'll say this as someone who's got I think a budget background and a fundraising background. I did a lot of program director work in college. School budgeting isn't really that difficult. It's actually really simple. You can't spend money out of certain pots of dollars that you're given, and you can only spend it on certain line items. You just need to figure out early in your summer and in your school year, maybe even now, if you're at a school, you can plan what your needs are for next year so that you can go ahead and find prices, get quotes, find vendors, find the best price, and then do your needs, wants, and wishes assessments. Once you do the assessments, then you figure out where can you get someone to pay for those things. And it sounds really simple, but I did a grant with ESSER for ESSER funds and got 10 picnic tables for an outside courtyard this year. We had already said it was a need. We had budgeted for it. It was $10,000 or about $8,000 that we would have spent out of school money in one form or another, athletics, beyond all that. The grant freed that money up for other purposes. Someone found that, said, let's get it out of this. We wrote the grant. That was simple. Money came to us, tables were purchased. We waited 6 months, but that's okay. You have to become a little bit of a champion for the dollars spent, and I think be a good steward of the money you have. There will be vendors coming out of the woodwork to sell you things the very beginning of the school year because they know you have cash that you might need to spend. It doesn't mean it's really what your school needs. So plan well, plan with the right stakeholders at the table. Get your department chairs, talk to them. Your school improvement team, your school improvement plan should reflect your budget needs. And then, honestly, the spending of the money is the easiest part once you've got the plan in place.
Yeah, that's just accounting. The biggest thing here to remember is the difference between budgeting and accounting. Accounting is just how you track the money that you spent. Budgeting is when you set those priorities. What are your priorities? Making sure that you're supporting that school improvement plan, that academic piece. So budgeting. So next week when these 2 experts talk to us, they're going to talk about budgeting, which is setting priorities and needs and those kinds of things. Accounting is the easy part, how to keep up with the money. That's the easy part. But what to spend it on, not how. Accounting is the how. The what is what's important. That's what makes your school great. And one of the things that Dr. Holloman said there is what I was referring to is the difference between that 15% and that 30% of that local budget. In the wealthy districts that fund about 30%, there's not that big delta, that big divide between what it takes to run an athletic program and what you've got on hand. But I suspect that Dr. Holloman's district's down closer to that 15% threshold. that locals, and so he's not getting a lot of extra money or enough money to run, for copy paper. He's not getting enough money to run all his athletic programs. He's having to get out and do resource development through grants or fundraising or whatever. That's what the whole Leandro case was about. The Leandro case is these wealthy districts can give that 30%, and they just show up and sober with clean clothes on every day, and it goes well. Those of us over here in these 15% districts, we're killing ourselves trying to figure out how to stretch a dollar. Well, we want the state to make up that difference. Well, the state said no. So if you're in one of those 15% districts, you're picking and grinning, you're getting after it. I worked in 2 of those, and then I worked in 2 high wealth districts. And I can tell you, we were gentlemen of leisure in the high wealth districts, but in the low wealth districts, man, we were doing it with spaghetti dinners, wearing a hairnet when I had hair. We were doing everything you could think of to try to raise a dollar, just to try to keep the copy machine going.
Well, I'll share with you real quick. You can actually look this up for any school district in North Carolina, or actually the US. For our school system, which again, we're talking about, just at 8,000 students, 64% of our budget comes from state money, 25% from local, and right at 11% from federal. Yeah. I mean, that's the real breakdown of about $82 million that our district receives in one form or another. Total budget allocations for our district for school supplies. So the money that actually comes to the schools in 2021-22 was just under 600,000. So if you want to kind of break that down of what that sounds like, there's a lot of money flowing in. Yeah. And it's really not, it's the physical plant, it's the personnel, it's the maintenance, it's child nutrition, it's, transportation, it's all those things, money spent on, of the dollars we get. How much do you get for paper, pencils, pens, markers, glue is a really small percentage of that. But it makes a big difference in the school. It really does.
That's exactly right. It's that delta. It's that difference between what you need and what you get. And higher wealth districts provide more of that. Lower wealth districts don't. And that's what the whole Leandro case is about. And you got to know that wherever you go to work, you've got to understand that. You may have to be a resource development person, but as much as a school administrator. And so that's really where you get that. Now, I do want, before I talk about accounting, I've got a couple of things here. In our next week, I'm going to cover this more in depth on my part, but I'm going to go ahead and I'll do this piece. I'll speak to it. Every district has policies on local fundraising. One of the things you got to be real careful of is Dr. Hallman was mentioning, don't go out and try to raise money for things that you're asking the county commissioners for in your budget. That's a no-no. Another big no-no is doing fundraisers at your school that compete with local businesses, especially your CTE classes. Don't be doing oil changes if the local lube guy down the street is hurting him. Those kinds of things. I inherited a high school where we had a photography lab, and the local picture companies had complained, and so they were using using the lab to shoot pictures, and which was against the law, and so we had to fix that part of it. But you have to be really careful that your fundraising doesn't go out and damage or anger the local business establishment. You want people to support you, so you have to do that. So in the end, you have some local things about fundraising. Fundraising at the middle and high school will be approved by the principal and then has to be submitted to your area or your superintendent for his approval or hers. Clubs have to submit their anticipated fundraising, has to go to the appropriate regional superintendent for approval. The following things are recommended to encourage community club and class or school participation: art festivals, carnivals, dances, car wash, barbecues, concerts, film, and other student faculty games. Those kinds of things which don't compete with anybody in the community. You can't use instructional time. You can't, you know, one of the things you got to realize is you can't trade state dollars for local dollars. You say, Dale, that sounds stupid. How could you trade state dollars for local? Who pays the salary of teachers? That would be the state. So if we take those state paid teachers rather than having them do what we paying them to do, which is teach school, and have them fundraising, you know, it's a really bad trade. It's about $10 for every one. We waste about $10 or spend about $10 in salary for every one that we can raise using them. So, you know, most districts have an express, and no, it's not implied. It's in policy. You can't fundraise during instructional time. You can't use teachers rather than doing instruction to actually get out and fundraise. You got to be careful about those things. You can't compete with local businesses. Your CTE can't be running businesses out of their shops or labs or dark rooms. You know, you have all of these restrictions on how you can raise money. Instructional related activities such as auto mechanics, tailoring, cosmetology should not be used for fundraising. CMS has even got it in there. It doesn't matter that it might not be competing, that they won't let them do it at all. That would be a no. You know, these deals on like building these little buildings in the carpentry classes. Well, then Mays Manufacturing that builds and sells them for a living doesn't like it when you're building those things and selling them for half the price that they are. So, well, I'm only building one a year, but the deal is everybody says, well, why are you charging $16,000 for this building when I can buy one over here at the high school for $5,000? You're gouging me. We had that one to happen here in a local district. You know, and so when I was high school principal, when I got there, you know, back in the mid 90s, there set one of those little buildings, and before I left, we had to stop because we had a local concern that was building those, and it was putting, you know, they lobbied the school board and our school board member, and we had to stop building those little buildings in our carpentry class. Wayne built those and did a great job, but no, can't do that. You know, the local builder that builds those says that, you know, it's making him look bad, what y'all charge versus what he charges. And so you have to understand, you don't get enough money locally in most places to fund what you need, but you got to go out and find it. But you got to be more creative than competing. You know, you shouldn't be selling candy and drinks during, you know, you can't compete with your you know, your nutrition program, your lunch program. You know that has a lot of federal money in that. You can't compete with it, so you can't have your drink machines and candy machines on until after lunchtime. Some districts won't let you have them on at all during the school day. Now, when I was in CMS, we initially could turn them on after lunch, but then eventually it got to where we couldn't turn them on until the end. We put timers on, couldn't turn them on until the school day was over. I guess there was some issue with that, but again, you got to know these things, but don't think that you're going to get plenty of money and that, you know, it's just going to be, you know, you're going to be, you know, I can spend it on whatever I want. The money that comes to you, you're not going to be able to spend on what you want, and there won't probably be money that you can spend on what you want. It won't come. And so that's kind of the irony. The money that comes, you don't have control of. And there's no money that comes that you do. You got to get out and raise it yourself. You got to find a way. And so those are those policies. Now, the last thing I want to talk about tonight is, how does money come to you? And so let's talk about how money is allotted to you. So I'm going to stop my share because I'm going to have my two experts talk here in just a minute. We do a modified accrual accounting system in North Carolina. And that simply means we use purchase orders and we have to get bids and do all those things. But it also speaks to how you get your money. So your state money it comes to your district. It doesn't come to your school. It comes to your district. But it comes based on your attendance, average daily membership. And so when the money comes every month, and it doesn't come, as I've told you before, it doesn't come at the beginning of the year. It's not like, you know, when, you know, when the first day of school over at Dr. Holloman's school, he's got 1,250 students. They don't take, all right, it's $8,000 and multiply that by 1,250 and send that to the district. That is not what they do. In the modified accrual accounting system, everything has to be vouchered or purchase ordered. And so what happens is Franklin County Schools has to, and Durham County Schools and Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools They have to operate, they have to have money on hand to operate the first month of school. You got to pay for it yourself. And then when you turn in your principal's monthly report, PMR, and it's done electronically now, which basically all that is how many students attended. And they take and divide that $8,000 up per student for the year into 10 equal installments paid at the end of each of the 10 school months, at the end, not at the beginning. You got to have enough money on hand to run the first month. And then that $800, but we subtract from that 800 the district absentee rate. So if we had 95% attendance for the district for this month, we subtract 5%, 5 times 8 is 40, we get $760 for that student this month. We don't get the whole 800. That's how the modified accrual accounting system works as well. So remember, you don't get all your money up front, you get it monthly. And the voucher that you have to send to get it is called the PMR, the principal's monthly report. It is calculated in Power School, and that attendance average is done for your district. And so the state subtracts the absentee rate for that month, that 20-day period. School month is 20 days. And they subtract that, and that's how much money you get vouchered back to you to reimburse you for what you spent that month. And then the next month you spend that money and they reimburse it. And so it's always a rolling reimbursement system. Now you say, Dale, why is that important? Well, it's real simple. If you spend the money incorrectly, if you do something you're not supposed to, you don't get your money back when they send you the money at the end of that month. You spend your money up front, they reimburse you. That's how it works. And that way they have control. If you don't spend it correctly or you do something inappropriate with it, you just don't get it back. You're just out. For example, if you suspend a bunch of kids and don't put it down and you count them as present, the next month they knock that off what they send you. They only pay for kids who are in school. The state only pays for kids who are in school. So if you get caught cheating on that deal, suspending kids or sending them home and not telling the state and counting them as present rather than absent, as soon as you get caught, first thing they do is they deduct that from your next monthly pay that you get on your voucher the next month. You only get, they subtract that from it. If you misspend their money in any way, they just subtract it from the next month. It's not like they give it to you all up front. And so now what that leads me to, and I'm going to speak to before we go to our experts on their money, this notion that if you get kids who come from charter school during the year, that the charter school's already gotten all their money, that is not correct, because they don't get all their money. They get it monthly installments like any charter schools or public schools. They get a monthly installment just like everybody else. So this notion that this kid started in charter school, they got the whole $8,000 and now we got to educate this kid for free. That is not true. They got the first month's money if he was still on the roll at the end of the month. But if he's with you the second month, if he's on your roll, you get the money for him. So this notion that charter schools try to enroll all these kids and then kick them out so that they just get to keep their money, that there is no keep their money. The state's not dumb enough to give you money for the whole year. They give it to you in 10 installments. All right, so what I want our two experts to take us out on tonight is what you do in your building to try to ensure that whatever money that you get, that you distribute it equitably in your building, and what, if anything, you do to try to encourage attendance. Those are kind of the two big things about attendance and about money and budgets. Is there something that you do to try to encourage kids to come? Because the more kids come in your district, the more money you get. And how do you try to make sure that whatever funds that come, that you distribute those monies as equitably as possible, under what control you have and how much control you have to do those things. All right, so we'll do reverse this time. Dr. Hallman.
So I have a question, and this is me actually asking because I'm trying to remember is it every day a student's in attendance, or do they have to just be there every, like once during the PMR? They're showing up, so they're on the PMR report. As long as they show up one day on a PMR, that's counted for attendance. Is that not correct, or is it a
Well,
percentage?
they do it as an aggregate. So if the kid only showed up, if he was absent the rest of those days, obviously, but you're talking about in terms of if he shows up as enrolled, if he only showed up one day, then we would subtract the other 19 and we'd only get paid for that one day, basically.
Right, but once you withdraw them, then they're gone completely from your roll.
That is correct.
So I know for elementary and middle schools, it is a very different scenario because you have compulsory attendance. Students must be in school, and it is a much stronger case when a parent is receiving that letter saying they're going to be taken to court, and there's a juvenile attendance committee that's working on that. For high schools, we struggle, and I'll say this really isn't about the dollars. This is just about where the money comes from. But when we have kids who are disengaged, who are disconnected, we are trying to get them back in school so that attendance is there. We know they can't do well if they're not here with us. And I know virtual programs have been going on for the last couple of years with COVID. Those are going away. Some districts are keeping them, but I think they're keeping them because of this. I don't know if it's actually because it's the best thing for the student. It's just because it's to a degree a money grab. Seniors, they get this disease. I think the CDC has documented it well, called senioritis, and they begin to stop showing up to school. So you have to bring them back in. It's less about the money, more about just making sure that the kids are engaged and are connected. But as you look at it, it is also, it hits your PMR. I mean, early graduates, we don't get dinged for that at the high school level. Once they have graduated, then we don't lose dollars for them in the spring of the year because they have actually met their requirements.
That is correct.
So early graduates do not impact us with our PMR report. And I think we may have had 56 this past spring. It does improve things for us in the spring because more, fewer kids taking elective classes. Those 50 students now are not going to be sitting in 200 seats. So it actually helps to make our resources extend a little bit more. Same thing with anybody we can work into a career and college promise program with a community college or any other type of outside program that is funding neutral. So we look at a lot of those things as a way to bring down the total number of kids who might be in a seat on campus in a classroom, then therefore pulling resources. We don't have a way though of somehow getting more dollars. Our district actually sets our number, Dr. Lamb, on day one of the school year. Actually from the 2021-22 school year, their planning allotment is the one they'll use in Power School for the next school year for us. So even if we were to bring in 50 more kids, we won't see an increase in our budget allotment for this year unless we have an error, an accounting error that has happened, something like that. The district might see it, but it doesn't come to us specifically.
That's a great point. You won't ever get more than what you start with. You'll get less. And one of the things that we were encouraged to do when I was in Charlotte was find a way, if we could, to reward teachers who had good attendance, who encouraged students to come and made classes interesting and didn't try to throw kids out, because that money comes to the district. Now, it didn't help us. We got our money was set on day one, but the money to come into it made a big difference on the money coming to the district. And so they wanted us to incentivize our teachers, at the local level, for me to figure out some way to incentivize them to, so that students attended regularly. Now, it wasn't going to affect my allotment as principal of that high school, but it did affect how much money came to the district from the state in that PMR. And so that was the notion in Charlotte. We did do incentives for teachers who did a good job and students attended well, because it was a boon for the district, not for us. On day one, we knew what our budget was going to be based on how many students we had. We knew what we were going to get but we did, I'm not sure if they still do, but we did run, and we were encouraged and given some resources to incentivize teachers for attendance in Charlotte, because it helped the district, even if it didn't help us. Dr. Griffin Jordan, if you'll take us out tonight on what goes on in Durham.
Okay, sure. So as has been said, attendance is extremely important. We used to have the truancy court where parents would get the 6-day, the 9-day letters saying, you know, your child has missed so many days. And we utilize that worked to a degree, because you could pull in, eventually you could pull in parents to court if their children did not come to school. That in Durham has gone. Parents don't get the letters saying that you would have to show up in court. So we're having to refocus how we engage students and encourage them and let them see the benefit of coming every day. For most students, they're fine, but especially since COVID, and I think it's and you can't just blame it on the kids, because it's like everybody. It's like when you have the meetings that for so long you did on Zoom, and now it's like you got to go to the meeting. Nobody wants to go. It's like church was on Zoom. Now you got to go back to the church house. Some people are still on Zoom at the church. So students now are like, some of them, it's just hard for them to get back in the swing of things. So we're working with them. We have really amped up, and the district has, and I'm really happy that they have, we've amped up our SEL, our social emotional learning component within the district. We have funds that we've been allotted. So we do things in school, especially during lunchtime when the students have free time anyway, that they really don't want to miss out on, like really fun things. We have mini carnivals, mini festivals, mini this and that, where we'll take, you know, the 45 minutes that they have for lunch and do something really exciting. So that has helped us get a lot of students back, because it's something other than just sitting in class. That's what we're trying to work with. We want them to come and learn, but we're working on other ways to keep them engaged and motivated to be there. As far as funding, distributing funds equitably, we have a lot of school improvement team meetings. We meet probably twice a month at least. I think that for me, it is a perfect way to have the teacher representatives, those that were elected by the staff, to come and help me spend the money. So if things are said, it's like, okay, so you're represented to the school improvement team and you're welcome to come to the meetings. You know, we have a voting body, but everybody can come and speak up. We have a lot of digital tools. Since COVID, there are 50 million things, digital platforms that, you know, this teacher might be using one thing and then another teacher might be using another thing. So, and they all want it now. And the companies are smart. Since COVID is over, now they're doubling the cost, and, you know, we've got to purchase. So we can't purchase them all. We look at it, and that's a line item that we just looked through and decided. And tomorrow we'll have a faculty meeting and we're presenting it to the staff. These are the digital platforms that we'll purchase and utilize for next school year, based on the teachers' survey and feedback, and the school improvement team getting together to assess those needs. We mentioned allotments. I just had my first allotment meeting yesterday. When you go in there, I don't know how other districts do it. It's very intimidating, but luckily I have a very nice central office, so everybody was very welcoming. But as you have your supervisor for principals, you have the lead financial officer, you have HR, like all the big wigs are in your allotment meeting, because you're talking about positions and funding for the following year. So I think, as Dr. Holloman said, they don't give you money again or reassess things. What we did now was we looked at our projected ADM. We looked at our current, our past, and then our projected, and that's where they got our number of positions, the funding for the instructional support, like he said, the guidance counselor. That's where you can either gain or lose positions. So on my form, and I have it here, it's like there were a couple areas in yellow, and they started out by saying, if you see something in yellow, that's where you're over in your positions and you're over the funding. So that was a large conversation that we had, and that's where you'll have to explain why you need, because they have some money to the side, but you've got to explain reasoning for keeping what you have. So yeah. I explained, okay, so this is why I need to keep that extra counselor. We've got several students that have committed, that have attempted suicide and were placed in residential mental health facilities, and they come back. I only have one counselor. We have another counselor that handles all of that, because our main counselor, she's dealing with graduation, seniors, transcripts, all the recommendation letters, all that stuff. We need another counselor to deal with everything that is happening now since COVID. So luckily I did a good job. So I kept that position, but the allotment meetings, you will have that every year. It's very important. I did have a pre-allotment meeting with my HR representative, just to kind of make sure I was going to be prepared. I'll call somebody in a heartbeat before a meeting, the meeting before the meeting, to make sure I'm prepared in there. So that's how we kind of do things as far as our budgeting. I think we mentioned PTSA in one of the earlier things as far as their fundraising and how that kind of ties in. They have their own pot, but of course, on the big scheme of things, if something goes wrong, it's me. So I need to be abreast of what they're doing and monitor that as well.
Yeah. Kelly, before we get to you, we'll open up for questions. Just 1 second. I want to end up here. So the notion here, and what, thank you, doctor. Thank you, doctors, our experts tonight. The notion here is I hear this all the time. I'm not really a math person. But you've got to get down in the weeds on budgeting and accounting, and the money is where you will, where most likely do harm to yourself or your career if you don't manage and know where your money is being spent. So you've got to get down in the weeds, and you've got to find out how it works in your district, and that's it. And then the last part is Dr. Griffin Jordan gets the prize tonight. She hit upon the question, the answer to the question about equity goes back to the last bullet of our OMA task 1. When we ask you, what role does your school improvement team play in your budgeting process? And that's where the equity piece comes in. And that's what Dr. Griffin Jordan just told you, is that teachers can come to the school improvement team and plead their case for financial resources. If you don't have that piece, and that's kind of that's the closure, this is the benediction for the evening. If you want to have equity in your funding and in your building, you have to make sure that school improvement team is involved in that budgeting process. That's kind of, and the state even has listed that as, why do we do all these things in task 1, we kind of tack that on at the end. You're like, well, what difference does that make? That's the whole equity piece of budgeting. That doesn't mean that everybody gets the same or that everybody gets what they want, but it means that there is a process in your building where people can come and try to get the things that they need for themselves and their students. And that's through the school improvement team. So that's when you say, how do you assure equity in your building and funding? That is that route, and that's why that's in OMA task. All right, it's time for questions. I see Kayla's got her hand raised. Questions for our experts.
Yes, hi. I wanted to know, is student tardy, does that play a role in attendance? Like how, and then for students who might be sent to alternative schools, but their home school is still your school, does that impact budgeting in any way, or the funds you receive in any way?
Parties
I'll
don't
speak.
count against you, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say tardies don't, because it's not true attendance. Even if your school system has a policy in place regarding, how many minutes a student must be in class, to be counted present, there's still, your daily attendance is the number. So period attendance isn't, tardies aren't, field trips don't count into it, athletics, none of that, those kind of things. It's truly bodies in a seat for whatever your, that 11 o'clock time frame where attendance is taken. If your alternative school has its own school code, then no, it doesn't impact you. But if you are the host school still, and they are simply a alternative program, then yeah, their lack of attendance anywhere impacts the district's overall funding, but it won't ever really show up on your doorstep.
Okay.
It's true. Now,
And just to,
go right ahead.
oh, I was just going to piggyback on that with the alternative school. Two different scenarios that we've had to deal with the alternative school. If we're suspending them and their suspension is a 6-day suspension with enrollment or attendance at the alternative school, then they're still ours. That's just a place that they'll go so they're not home, so they can still get education.
Yep.
However, we did have a case where he was long-term, not for the full school year, but it was maybe 4 months. He was taken off of our roll, put on the school, the alternative school, which has their own LEA code for that time, and now he's back with us. So we do have an alternative school with their own school code, and we use them in both capacities in Durham. And then with the tardies, again, like Dr. Holloman indicated, tardies don't count. I know a long time ago, I remember 3 tardies equal 1 absence. That's not the case now. If a student is present half the class, they're counted as present.
Yeah, the tardy deal went away in the 90s. That was a long time ago. There was a time when tardies mattered. They don't anymore. To the point where we were doing tolerate no truancy and all that kind of crazy stuff. But thankfully that stuff went away. I think about 95 for us in Charlotte. All that stuff went away. We had to quit, and we got to stop chasing kids. Now, in terms of, we used to make a different designation, and you heard both of our experts. We have alternative schools, and school means that they have a school number. And that school number is very important, not the number itself, but if you have a number, they would be withdrawn from your school and go over there, but it won't affect you because it's still district attendance. But if they're out over there, it affects the district, and the money the district gets back. But we used to have alternative schools and what we called alternate schools. We now call those alternative programs. We've changed the terminology, and they don't have a school code, and your student goes over there, but they're still on your roll. Whether they attend over there or not, again, it hurts the district. They're still on your roll versus being on somebody else's roll. But alternative programs, whether they're programs or an alternative schools, are funded differently. There is an allotment that comes for those. And then there's different monies that come. But a kid being absent hurts the district. It won't hurt your school, but it hurts the district. And when they move over there to that school, it won't hurt the money that you get, because as Dr. Holloman said, you get yours, they tell you how much you're going to get, but it hurts the pool that comes into the school district. Remembering that they don't vary your money every month, they vary the money that comes to the district. And they don't give you everything that comes from the state to your school that you would garner to they hold a certain amount of it back. That's what when Dr. Griffin Jordan said she went and talked with them about funding that. Probably that wasn't locally funded. Probably that was some of that holdback money, as we call it. So generally, the rule of thumb when I was in the central office is we only allotted about 80% of the state money out to schools, and we held 20% of it back. where we could get a position here, or if we had a problem there, it was about 80-20. And so that the central office has got a pot of money. So you don't actually get the whole amount that you would get per your student. About 80% of it's all you get. And then the state, because they know that the state can knock off up to 5%, because generally the attendance rarely runs above 95%. The state's going to knock 5% off what they indebted to give you to begin with because of attendance. And so the district, they've got to have a little margin to protect themselves there. So they only put out about 80% of it. So that's why sometimes at the end of the year, as both of our principals talked about earlier, you get that notice is, we got this money, you guys spend it before it's gone. That's that holdback money. That's that state money that they've held back. And if you don't spend it this year, it goes away. It reverts back to the state. All accounts revert at the end of the year. Well, that's that. You say, well, where was that money all year long? Well, it was there, but they were holding it back in case of an emergency or something that happened. And so that holdback money, it gets cleaned out every spring because it can't roll over to the next year. It can't accrue. But that's that holdback, and it's generally about 20% of the state budget that would be coming to the district if from total attendance. They hold about 20% of that back at the district level. And so that all of a sudden you may get a notice one day. I've been principal, and you get those. You got, if you can have the purchase order in by close of business today, you can spend this much money. I mean, it'd be just that quick. And that's that state holdback money. That is not local funds. That's state holdback money in the spring. And it will roll away. It cannot accrue. It will, if you don't spend it, at about the end of April, it's gone. And you don't get it back. All right. Anybody else have any questions for our experts? Next week, they're going to talk about the budgeting process at their school. How they do their needs assessment, what they send out to teachers in terms of what you need, how they set their priority, how their school improvement team is involved in that, so that we hit that equity piece that we're required to make sure is a part of our funding, is that equity piece, how they go about doing that. So I'm excited to hear from them next week about that. Remember, in 2 weeks, we'll have our Easter break, and then the week after that, you'll do that last case study. Get started on that case study now. It's long and involved. You're going to be able to have a lot of pieces in that one. So go ahead and get involved in that. All right, if there's nothing else tonight, thank you all for attending. It's always good to see you. And as always, thanks for choosing Gardner Webb. I'll see you next week.
Have a great week,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.